Thank you. Well, I must say, I was disappointed to find out that this may or may not be of major benefit to our city in terms of alleviating our need for affordable housing for mostly working people and people of low income. It would appear to me there's clearly going to be a benefit, but it's rather uncertain now. I guess I was under the mistaken impression that we were going to have all or primarily Sonoma citizens. So that's disappointing. But I think it also gives me a feeling that given that we don't know what our benefit's going to be, it certainly should be a project that will complement our town now. It's even more important that it complement our town and our culture and history, as well as the idea of a Broadway corridor that is the entrance to our town and should suggest and enhance that trip down Broadway. And this part of town should be improved along the ideals of the general plan, even more so now. Just a comment on this loading dock business, because I think for the record, we ought to understand that better. Mr. Goodison, it's my understanding there is that it's a loading area on the street, that there's no loading dock, which is something different. Is that accurate?
I don't have a definition that I'm using. They call it the dock. Okay. I mean, that's just how it's commonly referred to. It has a very short, steep grade, and I'm going to say that whatever you want to call it, it's badly designed. But I don't know what definition
I don't want to pontificate here, but it happens that industrial real estate is my business for 30 years, and I've been on the design team of 30 or 40 manufacturing and distribution buildings that have docks. 10, 20, 30 docks, and there's no dock there that I can see. A dock is a 110 to 130 foot span where a major over-the-road truck can back into a dock, which is 46 inches high, forklift drives in and pulls the stuff out fast, and the truck leaves. We don't have that. Right. We have a loading area. It should have had a loading dock, but I wasn't here when the lodge was approved, but what I think happened is that loading docks eat up area where you could have hotel rooms and bars and restaurants, and they figured a way to not get a loading dock because it would have had probably an in and out. Usually they have an in dock and an out dock for goods. That would have been 50 feet wide and 120 feet long, and it would have gone right into what they have as a hotel. So they kind of rode in on a big bonus there. They're using our public street for loading and interfering with traffic. It should not have happened. And it's a reminder that we should never let that happen on any new development. Particularly, the only reason why we load on the streets around the square is that's the only thing they can do. But new development should never be allowed to have loading in the street anymore. Don't have it, or have it the responsibility of the landowner. Anyway, I want to stop with that, but I don't know how we fix that problem. I would like to very much support Commissioner Coleman's concept of a sound wall in the project as it sits. I think a sound wall is really important for the neighbors, all the way down, not just for the parking lot. I'm very much in favor of that. I'd also like to second Commissioner McDonald's observations on the two projects that Mr. Cooperman presented. Flashed a few scenes. I said, wow, that looks really interesting. It's very different than this. It's not massive, and it's interesting architecture. It looks like it has interesting mobility around, walking. I see a lot of landscaping. I see some nice porches with plenty of room on them. Now, it may be that those projects are of a different income level, and this architecture, correct me if I'm wrong, could be less expensive per square foot to put tenants in. And maybe that's important to meet the income levels that you have in this site. I don't know that. I think the projects that you showed on the additional ones, the two, that's probably more expensive to build. So that's something I can't address. But I support Commissioner McDonald's articulation much better than I could. I don't have the vocabulary to describe why those two projects were appealing, but they were very appealing. Just a quick whiff of them was very appealing. Something like that here, I'd be very attracted to. So my last comment would be my street tree idea, which I still think is a gesture towards the important policy of the general plan for the Broadway corridor. I think this area really needs to have that same feeling and theme up the street. I think those mature street trees on an even separation out in the Caltrans property, likely, that's the only place they could go and have a place to grow, mature trees. I think in any case, that's really important. That sort of solidifies the trip up Broadway. So I really would hope that we could have those street trees in place in any case, whatever reconfiguration you may be able to do with the project. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Well, on some aspects I'll agree and disagree with my fellow commissioners, but I think the one thing we can all agree is we want to thank the applicant, staff, and the public for their input on this project. You know, as expected, kind of big picture, obviously the more immediate neighbors are the most likely to be most sensitive about aspects of the project. And, you know, like any type of activity like this, there's a degree of give and take that's necessary. We need housing. We need housing of all kinds. And no one project, I don't think, should have to bear the burden of satisfying all the housing needs of a community. We've talked about this in other meetings. This is not the only project that we've looked at. There are several others. And so I think this satisfies a niche. It's been a long identified project as a housing opportunity site, specifically for this type of housing. And I think it's time that we get it done and built in some way. So, and I just think in this day and age, it's as was pointed out by a few of the commenters. You know, I mean, density is the reality. I mean, we if we're going to do an infill project, if we're not going to sprawl, then we have only really the option of increasing the density of housing. And that is the character of Sonoma as much as the barracks and an adobe and a bungalow and anything else is, because they all represented the predominant housing form and the socioeconomic climate and what was available at the time that they were built. And our community is not a static element. It is a growing, living, vibrant thing. And so here we are in 2017, and we need to continue and grow and be vibrant. We won't be that if we just simply repeat the forms of the past. So we need to think differently and be doing something differently. So I think that this project addresses that. You know, I was kind of roughly going to go through the different areas that were in the environmental review, but I won't. I think many of them have been covered already, but so I'm going to skim through here quickly. I think, you know, aesthetically, I guess, you know, it's the old beauty's in the eye of the beholder. I think less is more, and I see that in these simple forms and the reference to the agrarian aspects and the agrarian history of the project. So in that way, I think it pays homage to the community, and I think to try and do something different there is unnecessary. I think part of looking at those simple forms in the elevations and things we're seeing now, it's without the landscape, it's without people, it's without that activation that a little bit of time will bring on something. So I'm completely fine with the way they are, and I appreciate the fact that the community building brings a little bit more of a modern element to it, and, you know, references a different point in time. think the privacy issues have been well addressed with the plantings and the fact that it really isn't going to be yards that are on the western border. I mean, we're talking about adding 20-some trees. By my count, there were about 7 pretty mature trees already in the backyards of residents along Bragg Street. And while there was great concern about privacy and issues, as best I could count, there were about 19 north and south facing windows on the second floors of those buildings that were, I think they look like they have a minimum setback of maybe 5 feet, so they're about 10 feet apart. Certainly having a row of trees and buildings situated 15 to 20 feet away is actually creating more privacy than those residents already have from one another. So I don't think this project should be faulted in any way for that. And additionally, I think having that vegetation there, the idea of a sound barrier, other than what would be normal and customary in this community, I think is an undue burden to put on this project, and I think one that would basically be putting a cold shoulder to the idea of a community or neighborhood. And it doesn't matter if this project's being built or whatever's going to be built, there's going to be 12 to 18 months of construction noise. That's the reality. And we've never asked any other project here in town to construct a 12 to 15 foot high masonry wall to mitigate construction noise, because I think in the long run you don't want something like that around anyway, so you would just have to tear it down afterwards, and that would be a tremendous waste for a minor inconvenience. Air quality, a lot of people concerned about that. I mean, you're on Broadway. We unfortunately don't have a metric other than the ones that we have for the Bay Area. Air quality, yes, I'm sure there is particulate matter from diesels and other things in that vicinity, but we don't have a way, at least now, to accurately measure that. And again, you can't burden this project with all the traffic that's on Broadway. So I don't think that's an issue. I don't really think this project is responsible for litigating the faults that might have occurred when the lodge was approved and that loading dock was put in. The reality is, I think as someone commented earlier, that someone's just going to be happy to live here because they're going to have a home. And some people say, well, I might be looking at a loading dock and I have to keep my windows closed a little, on Broadway, I mean, it's noise. So sometimes you close the windows, sometimes you don't. You don't have to do it 7 by 24, 365, but you might when it's appropriate. I think, the rudimentary things, biological resource and cultural resources, those have all been addressed, and it seems like no one's majorly concerned about that. Just back on the whole, does this fit with the general plan and the land use? I think it does. I think the setbacks exceptions that are being asked for are relatively minor. I know I've disagreed with Mr. Bohar on this before on another project, but I think it's really important to push things to the street. I mean, if you look at the